We begin this week's show looking at the growing political crisis in Israel and the economic issues it's facing as a result. Israel is going to be 75 years in a few weeks' time. But instead of holding national celebrations, it is in turmoil, facing what some fear could turn into a civil war. This is all due to the government's plans to change the way the judicial system works. The uncertainty in Israel's political situation extends deep into the business sector and affects the whole economy. And let's take a look at how. Israel's currency, the shekel, was the world's third worst performer in February as judicial jitters weighed on the market. It was down by 10% against the dollar in recent weeks. The Tel Aviv Stock Exchange is also down 20% so far this year, as intense public protests against it are taking its toll on the country's economy. And credit rating agencies Fitch and Moody's warn that the Israeli government's plans to curb the judiciary could weaken the country's institutional strength and negatively affect its economic outlook. Let's now get some analysis on this with Hafid Al-Ghawel. He's a Johns Hopkins University Foreign Policy Institute Senior Fellow and joins me from Washington, D.C. Many thanks for being with us today. So, intense weeks of protests in Israel. First of all, can you help us understand what's been happening? Can you help us make sense of all that?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for the invite. It's always lovely to be with you. What's happening in Israel is really under it is a very fundamental philosophical and ideological conflict between those who are secular, more liberal, more interested in an Israel that is open, democratic, under the rule of law, and those extremists, both nationalists and also religious extremists, who do not want to have any limitations on their decisions. Today, for example, Israel has the most conservative, most religious, probably extremist government in its history. And this government, led by Netanyahu, does not want to allow the judiciary to have any say on what the government decides to do. And therefore, they want to remove the right of the judicial system to actually revoke any laws or policies that are produced by the Knesset and also the government. So it is a very fundamental conflict between two visions of what Israel is all about.
Right.
And that's going to have all kinds of course, ramifications for both the survival of the actual functioning of the country and its economy.
Right, so I do want to ask you, what are the main concerns for the business sector? Because we've had some business leaders worrying about issues such as taxation, but also workers' rights, investors' rights. What could change as a consequence of this court's reform?
Once you change the laws of any country, and make it under sort of the whims of a radical extremist vision, that means you can affect everything else because, and businesses around the world, the economy relies heavily on the legal basis, the legal framework of the country they are investing in or functioning in. Because without that, the government, for example, and its allies in Knesset can pass all kinds of laws on taxation, on labor rights, on investments, and so on. Therefore, there is a serious concern, and it is a concern that is rooted in the very fundamental goals of any business around the world, and that is to be able to invest or to work or to function within a society that has laws to protect the rights of these businesses and their employers. Employees.
Interesting. And the story of Israel's economy was really something of a success because we've seen unemployment being very low for decades. And we've also seen Israeli market avoiding a series of economic recessions that hit the strongest economies. I do wonder what would happen if the credit rating profile really were to be cut.
That would be a very, very serious blow to any economy because once you do that, that means both outside investors and also lenders will take a second look and be very hesitant to invest or to enter into that market. And if they do, then the risks are much higher, and therefore their demands or return on their investments or loans must be also higher. That usually will create a serious slowdown of the economy. Um, and the problem you have here within the context of the region is that Israel has been doing fairly well outside of the normal regional economies of dependency on oil. Israel depends on its manufacturing and its technology products. The problem is, unfortunately, from a political point of view, is that Netanyahu was able to normalize relations in his last term as a prime minister with the countries like the UAE, for example. And therefore, these religious and nationalists within Israel, the more they feel safe, the more they feel others are accepting them, like, for example, the example of the Abrahamic Accord, the more extremist they become rather than less extremist. The UAE, for example, relies enormously today on the technology products of Israel, especially on the security front. The deal was that the UAE basically recognizes Israel, and Israel will provide it with all kinds of security, eardropping, monitoring systems, which Israel is very good at, to actually maintain the power within the structure of the UAE as it is today. So there is a synergy between these two governments. It's the same with other governments, but the UAE is a very prime example of how Israel now feels, or this Israeli extremist who, led by Netanyahu, feels that, well, I won and I opened up new markets, opened up new frontiers for Israel, and therefore, he becomes less and less inclined to actually compensate.